We're going to start section 1.1 where we focus on what is biology, because you're obviously taking biology class, so it's kind of useful to know what the heck does that mean. Now, when we talk about what is biology, we're really going to be focusing on this idea of studying life. We're going to focus on life. That's the key term. So when we talk about studying life, we're going to look at life as it is now. So you can see like this picture of a sea urchin that someone caught recently. So that's pretty much present life. But we can also look into the past using things like fossils, so we can understand how life has been before, and we can make predictions based upon what we understand for what life will be like in the future. Now, when we study life, there's several aspects of life that we can study. So first of all, we can study interactions. So we can study how things that are alive will interact with other things that are alive. We can also see how things that are alive will interact with stuff that's not alive. So what we would normally just call the environment. If you're wondering kind of how this works, if I eat a rabbit, life interacting with life. Obviously, I'm benefiting, the rabbit not so much. But I could also go somewhere very cold and freeze to death. The cold is not alive, but it can still have an interaction with me where it makes my body get too cold and I could die of hypothermia. Obviously, that's significant to me because I'm now no longer alive. So these can both be significant interactions. We'll also focus on structures, which will be things like the spines of the sea urchin. It'll be like looking at the various organs that are contained in the central part of the sea urchin. Now, the structures themselves are just going to be kind of what we can see, ultimately just us looking at the physical nature. When we want to figure out what the things do, that's going to be this function aspect. So I don't want to just know that the sea urchin has a digestive organ. I want to know how does it work? You know, what chemicals does it make in what organs? What particular substances do those break down? Perhaps why is it organized the way it is? You know, is there a specific reason that this digestive organ comes before that one? So that's going to fall under this function. So the structure would be just kind of like, hey, look, there's a TV. The function is like busting it open and saying, how does this TV ultimately give me this picture that I can see on the front of it? They're related, but they are distinct. Now, whenever you're going to talk about biology, let's focus at least somewhat on why the heck are we doing this? What's the purpose of biology? Why does it matter? And so biology is going to focus on solving problems that humans and other species face. Now, as a person on this planet, there's a lot of things that you don't necessarily think about too much unless there's a problem with them. But they're huge, some of the most foundational, most important things to civilization and mankind as we know it. So the first one of those is agriculture. You probably don't think too much about food other than what do I want to eat today. You don't necessarily think about how we grow our crops, how we raise and process meat. But if you're hungry and there's no food, that's probably the foremost thing on your mind. And so biologists put a lot of time into making sure that we can, in the best way possible and the healthiest way possible, grow crops, raise livestock, process them, store them, ship them, all those things that are involved with this. They're also going to focus on disease, so medicine. You once again probably don't think too much about your health unless something goes wrong. So we've got the mosquito here because that's a vector for a bunch of stuff. So if you get West Nile, if you get malaria, there's lots of stuff that mosquitoes can give you. If you have those things and you're miserable, once again, this is all you're probably going to focus on is you need to fix this for me. But when you feel well, we don't necessarily think too much about this. But biologists think about this all the time. In medicine, we're thinking, how can we diagnose these things? How can we prevent these things? How can we treat these things once they already exist? And then on a broader scale, biologists will focus on the environment and how can we help maintain the quality of the environment we have. Preserve wetlands and woodlands and the ocean and keep everything from going toxic or being destroyed. And in many cases, once something does get to be toxic, how can we fix it? That's this idea of remediation. So if there has been an oil spill, if there has been some type of toxic waste dumped from a factory, how can we go in there and make it so that the area is livable again, so the area is safe again? Now, the trickiest part of biology, the study of life, is figuring out what the heck is life. If I'm looking at a rock, you've got acorns here, you've got eggs, I've got to try to figure out which one of these things is alive and which is not. And the first thing you really have to understand is this is going to be something that's going to be a human definition. It's not like things come out or come into existence and they're labeled, I'm alive. And so we're going to go through and use this human construct or definition where we say, all right, scientists have gotten together and we're going to define what it takes for something to be alive. This means there's going to be some things kind of on the edge where you might think, I want that to be alive, but it's not by the definition. So the following is going to be an 8-part definition where you have to meet all of these 8 criteria to be alive. If you can't check off one of these boxes, then you'd be considered non-living. Now, some other books, some other things you might see sometimes merge some of these and they'll have 7 or 6, but our book is going to use 8, so make sure you know these 8 things. So starting off, you've got to be composed of stuff. And the most basic thing that all life has is at least one cell. Now, many cells or many organisms will be multicellular. And so things like us, if I can spell, things like us, humans, are composed of about 100 trillion cells. So by no means do you have to just be a handful of cells. But ultimately, you have to have at least one cell. If you do not have at least one cell, you're not alive. We'll also have organization. Living things have structure to them. They have atoms that ultimately are grouped together into molecules. So a bunch of atoms is a molecule. You'll have these molecules grouped together and can form structures inside of a cell called organelles. So these are kind of like organs to your body, except they're way smaller. So they do special functions for a cell. You then have where organelles can be grouped into a cell, and this is the only thing you have to have. Like all life has these ones. But technically you can stop here. As long as you have a cell, you could still be alive. But many organisms even go beyond there, these multicellular guys. They'll have where cells group together to form tissues. You have tissues will group together to form organs, organs group together to form organ systems, and then ultimately that makes up the total organism. So we ultimately have all of these levels of organization. But you have some things like bacteria that only go to this cell level. They don't have to go beyond. So that's why the asterisk is there, just to let you know this is good enough. Continuity of life. If you're going to have life, it has to be able to keep passing on. I have a finite lifespan. I'm not going to live forever. So for me to be alive, I need to be capable of producing more of me. So even though I die, my category of things, if you will, humans, continues on. And so this continuity makes us have certain traits. So one of those traits is you have to be able to grow or develop. So this typically is going to be you're going to get bigger. This is critical because the most simplistic way of reproduction is just to split in two. If I can't get bigger, I can't split in two and still produce 2 organisms, 2 halves capable of surviving. You just get smaller and smaller until you're too small to live. So it's very important that organisms can grow, that they can ultimately change as they go through their lifespan. So simple thing, get bigger. Most people think no big deal. Then you have the reproduction aspect, which is to make more of you. So this is not just me increasing in size, it's me splitting into 2 or more separate entities. And once again, the simplest way of doing this is just to split. Obviously, things like humans have more elaborate ways where you'll have development of children. You can have in birds and such where they have the egg, where they'll have the development of the offspring there. So you don't have to just split, but that's the most simplistic way. And if you're a person, you're still going to have to get larger to be able to actually have a child develop in your womb, because you have to be big enough to be able to have this child there. So physically, it's necessary that you grow before you start having kids. So grow and develop, reproduce. So either on your own if you're asexual, or if you're sexual, that you'll be able to interbreed with others like you to produce offspring. Okay, powering life. If you're going to be alive, you have to have energy that will allow you to do the things you need to be alive, to move, to ultimately digest food, to, in many cases, it might just be simple things like within your body, to grow, to rearrange things. So you need energy. So you're going to have some type of metabolism. You're going to have some way of getting in some type of fuel. That could be food, it could be sunlight, that will allow you to have this energy. You can then use that energy to alter stuff the way you want it to be. So in other words, to give you an analogy, You have fuel, so I have to be able to get gasoline to put in my car, and I can then use that fuel to alter it. The fuel gets turned into CO2 vapor and water vapor that exits your exhaust. But in the process of kind of destroying that fuel, if you will, I'm able to do work. I'm able to make that vehicle take me to where I want it to be. So when we talk about energy, we're going to take in energy, and then we're going to use that to manipulate it to kind of use up the energy, if you will, and then using up that energy lets us do something else, lets us accomplish something else. Homeostasis. This is regulating yourself. We need to make sure that we regulate our bodies constantly. We don't want to get too hot or too cold. We don't want to get too acidic or too basic. There's a whole variety of things going on inside of our body, this kind of the symphony there, to make sure that we don't die. You know, if you eat a Twinkie and drink a Coke, you have tons of sugar being dumped into your bloodstream. Too much sugar can kill you, but your body has mechanisms that then take that sugar and store it, remove it from the bloodstream so it's safe, and then later when you haven't eaten for a while and your blood sugar is getting low, it can re-release it, trying to make sure that you stay perfectly balanced so you're alive. That's homeostasis, balance, regulation. And then lastly, life as we know it is capable of changing. Now this is useful in the short term where it lets you respond to stimuli. So if I throw something at you, you may duck or catch it or react in some way. You also have where if it starts to get a bit cold, you might start to shiver, you'll start to react in a way, homeostasis, to balance yourself out. So we have this ability to kind of interact with and react to our environment. And that's critical, especially in the now, to stay alive. But also long term, when you go through reproduction, we have this ability for genetics to let us adapt. And how this works is when you go through the process of reproduction, you occasionally will get screw-ups. So when I go through and reproduce, I will pass on my information that says how to build a human to my offspring. And so they will then be able to repeat that information, and they will be able to develop essentially like me to be a person. But you can also have through this process that you can have these screw-ups, or if it's sexual reproduction, you're mixing people's genes. So they're half my genes, half the other person's genes, the mother. And so we get these mixes. You get these, in some cases with mutation, these new things thrown in there that allow offspring to be different from the parents. And this is critical so that if something changes, they're able to adapt. You know, we're not all identical. And so individuals that might be a bit taller might have an advantage so they're able to survive better, or individuals that are shorter might have an advantage and they can survive better. And so over time, as different things become good, you know, useful to have, those individuals that possess them just do a better job. They reproduce more. And so their trait just becomes more common and it gets passed on more and more. And so life persists. So it's important that we have this continuity where we can pass on our information to offspring, but it's also important that that information can be altered sometimes. So that way we're not all just identical, and that really makes us resilient to change. So if the environment changes, we can oftentimes cope with that.